This is Deep Dive. I'm Li Yunqi. Hainan has been a hotspot for Chinese New Year vacations, but almost every year, visitors face a common issue as they try to depart the island at the end of their holiday. This year, it was even more difficult due to China's tourism boom in recent months. Tickets of all kinds were in incredibly high demand, leaving those without a return ticket or with cancelled tickets scrambling to find a way off the island. And for those who chose to drive to Hainan, the journey home was also challenging, especially for those in electric cars. Why do these transport limitations keep reoccurring in Hainan? Is there a feasible solution to solve this problem once and for all? To delve into these questions, I spoke with my colleague Guo Yan. This episode is brought to you on Saturday, February the 24th. So, being stranded on the way home at the end of your holiday is probably one of the worst feelings. I unfortunately had a similar experience during the previous Chinese Spring Festival for a different reason. And in the case of the travelers in Hainan, what were the reasons that made it difficult for them to leave the island?
Well, first is the tight supply of flight tickets. The price of flight tickets have been soaring over the past few days. Some tickets, for example, the flight ticket from Sanya or Haikou to Beijing, which are popular tourist cities on the Hainan Island, have been soaring tenfold than that previous to the Spring Festival holiday. And secondly is a lack of ferries. If you want to travel to the Hainan Island, there are only two options. One is by air and second is by ferry.
Right.
But there has been a surge in passengers who drove their cars to the island. The lack of ferry is a very big issue over the past few days, especially on the last day of the Spring Festival holiday. And many of the passengers still have been stranded because they want to drive back. Thirdly, the weather conditions. Qingzhou Strait has been covered by fog, and that affected the traffic flow.
So flight tickets surging 10 times than usual than the previous one. So China was already expecting a booming tourism market during this Spring Festival, and the actual numbers in the travel industry seem to be even better, higher than anticipated. And what role does Hainan play in this industry?
The tourism market in Hainan offers us a snapshot of the whole tourism market in China. The tourism market has been surging actually since the start of the year, even ahead of the Spring Festival. According to statistics from the Tourism Department of Hainan Province, during the week-long holiday, the province hosted over 9.5 million visitors, achieving total tourism revenue of 150 billion yuan. Compared to the same period last year, these figures represent growth of nearly 50%. And in comparison to the same period of 2019, the pre-pandemic period, the growth rate also increased over 50%. Look at the bigger picture. The whole travel market in China has been surging, and it has seen a strong surge in demand. According to data from the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, over 470 million domestic tourism trips were made during the holiday, an increase of 34% over the same period last year, an increase of nearly 20% compared with the pre-pandemic level in 2019. Also, behind this tourism boom are the rich travel resources of Hainan. Hainan has a very typical tropical weather. It's the southernmost island of China. It has balmy weather, beautiful beaches, as well as plenty of sunshine. Many seniors in China living in the north, like my parents, would like to travel to Hainan during winter. And finally, one of the sweet spots about tourism market in Hainan is duty-free shopping. Haikou has the world's largest standalone duty-free store, which has been bustling with shoppers during holidays. And shoppers visiting China's island province of Hainan spent a record nearly 2.5 billion yuan, or over 340 million US dollars on duty-free goods over the week-long New Year holiday, and that represents a year-on-year rise of 60%.
So tropical weather to get away from the winter coldness and a shopping paradise. And that led to a 50% surge this year to almost 10 million visitors during the week-long holiday, right? And for these travelers, one particular issue that stood out this year was that many people who took a road trip to the island, and later it turned out there were very limited spots for them to drive back to the mainland. But before we get to this part, Guo Yan, you may need to explain a bit that how these travelers drive a car across the strait to Hainan in the first place.
First, you have to download an application on your mobile phone, and then you can book tickets for your car. It costs around 400 yuan per trip. And then you drive your car onto the deck of the ferry, and then the ferry will take the driver and the car across the strait to the island. But there is a problem because the allocation for the cars, especially electric vehicles, are very limited on the deck of the ferry. That's one of the main reasons why so many car drivers have been stranded on the island, because many of the drivers went to the Hainan Island, for instance, in January. But most of the drivers would like to come back on the last day of the holiday. That put huge strain on traffic flow across the strait.
And why is it extra difficult for people who drive an electric vehicle?
Each ferry can carry at most 350 cars. And there's limited allocation for electric vehicles. Only 18 electric vehicles are allowed to be on board of each ferry, which means that drivers of electric vehicles could only have very limited chance to be on board when they travel back from the island. Less than 10% of the cars on board are allowed to be electric cars. Why they put such a limitation is because electric cars could spontaneously catch fire. And that would be really dangerous. Prolonged exposure to high temperatures or improper charging can potentially lead to spontaneous combustion. Like I've said, Hainan is a tropical island, and it's very probable that these cars could be exposed to high temperatures. And according to some studies, such fires can spread rapidly, release substantial amounts of toxic gases. Once out of control, they pose a serious threat to the vessel, jeopardizing the safety of people on board.
So it's very difficult to get a slot with a ferry service. That brings back discussions that is why we haven't built a sea crossing bridge over this Chongzhou Strait. Because the shortest widths of the strait can be under 20 nautical miles, which is less than half of the length of the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, a major sea crossing infrastructure, also the longest in the world, that China completed back in 2017-18. And building a bridge on this strait will definitely improve the traffic during peak travel seasons. But I guess the question is, how practical is it to build such a bridge?
In the 1970s. At that time, the Chinese government has tried to find some practical method to build a bridge to link up this island province to the Chinese mainland to help to develop its economy, because it's the southernmost province in China and it's a little bit far away from the political and economic centers on the mainland. But over the years, instead of building the bridge, the province mainly focused on alternatives, such as developing drone services and develop its high-speed ferries. It's really, really difficult to build a bridge across the Chongzhou Strait. First, I would like to talk about the complex geological factors. The difficulty of building the bridge is not only determined by its length. You have mentioned that the narrowest point of the Qingzhou Strait is less than half of that of the Hong Kong, Zhuhai, Macau bridge, the longest cross-sea bridge in the world that is built by China. Technical challenges are a core factor hindering the Qingzhou Strait cross-sea passage. Some official reports says the Qingzhou Strait has deep waters, strong winds, high waves, fast currents, and complex geological structures. Firstly, I would like to talk about the depths of the strait. With an average depth of 44 meters and a maximum depth of 114 meters, constructing bridge piers would require lifting the bridge deck more than 40 meters to accommodate shipping channels. And the height of the piers should be at least 100 meters, which is equivalent to a 30-story building. Additionally, wind conditions in the Qingzhou Strait are very challenging, with an average wind force of level 6 or above for nearly 170 days per year, which means more than half of the year the strait is faced with strong winds. During the arrival of a super typhoon in 2014, wind speeds in the strait exceeded level 17, which is equivalent to over 200 kilometers per hour. In contrast, the Hong Kong, Zhuhai, Macau bridge was designed to withstand a maximum wind force of only level 16. Which means if you want to build a bridge across the strait, you have to make it able to withstand a larger wind force than that of the Hong Kong, Zhuhai, Macau bridge, as you have mentioned. Finally is the seismic activity. As to the complexity of building a bridge here, the Qingzhou Strait experienced a 7.5 magnitude earthquake. Any geological movement could lead to catastrophic consequences for the project. Even though that China is known as a superpower of building infrastructure, like its iconic bridges and the tunnels, we have to consider the cost as well as the revenue and benefit. Apart from geological factors, there is an economic concern. The government has to think about how many years it has to take to recover the costs. For instance, in this case, it's estimated that it will take over 40 years to recover the cost of building a bridge across the Qingzhou Strait. This is under an ideal condition. If we don't consider the cost, the interest of the loans, even under ideal condition, you have to take half a century to recover the cost. Is it really worthwhile? I think the government has to consider about that.
So at this moment, we have to acknowledge there will be limitations or difficulty if you want to drive a car into Hainan. But of course, people entering Hainan through this method only accounts for a fraction of all the tourists. And it's probably more common to visit the island by air or taking the ferry, but not with a car. And all these transportation channels seem to be troubled quite often whenever there's a peak travel season. And has Hainan been seeking solutions to expand its transport capacity, and why this still remains to be a problem in this year?
Actually, the influx of travelers and this huge strains on traffic over the Qingzhou Strait is not a new problem. And this year this issue has become more prominent is because the arrival of passengers and travelers in Hainan Island has surged during the Spring Festival holiday. I could totally understand the pent-up demand after 3 years of travel restrictions. People would more likely to travel outside their own provinces or cities. And Hainan is actually a popular tourist destination in China, especially for those living in the north. To fix this problem, the local government has already taken a series of measures. For instance, the extension plan of some big airports has been undergoing in some major tourist cities on the island. And some of these expansion plan will be completed by the end of next year. by then, I think the capacity of the airports will be increased. And also, to fix this year's problem, some airlines have increased the flights, especially they increased wide-body planes to accommodate more passengers. Meanwhile, you can leave your car on the island, and you get registered on an application on your mobile phone. You can have your car transported later to the city where you are, and you can buy a flight ticket, fly back to Beijing, Shanghai, or any other cities on the mainland, and then left your car shipped by the ferry later. And this is an option for electric vehicle drivers. Talking about the expansion plan of airports and high-speed ways, here's another issue. We have to take comprehensive factors into account. These infrastructure facilities remain largely idle for most of the year because they are mostly used during the Spring Festival holiday. And this holiday only lasts 7 days, but we have 365 days a year. How about the rest of the year? That's also a problem I think the local government should take into consideration. For example, last year, the peak of tourist arrivals in Hainan province occurred in January, with 11.5 million visitors received. The lowest point was in September, with a total of only 5 million visitors. And this huge difference between the peak season and off-season will weigh on the decisions of policymakers to expand their facilities to accommodate more travelers. And I think making a sound plan ahead of the Spring Festival holiday is very important. For instance, my parents have been traveling in Hainan for 2 months ahead of the Spring Festival holiday. They went there at the end of last November. And before the holiday, my mom called me to spend a week with them in Hainan. But before I made the decision, I did a lot of research about this trip in January. I think it's part of the job-related habits. Working in the newsroom for years, we tend to do a lot of research before any business trip, and as well as travel. I did a lot of research, and I checked the popular travel websites, and I found that they have released various reports that forecasts the arrivals in some popular tourist destinations in China, such as Beijing, Shanghai, and Sanya, will reach new highs during this upcoming holiday. So I made a decision of not going there. I called my mom and to see if her want to travel back. My mom traveled back to Beijing 2 days ahead of the holiday, and she only spent over 500 yuan on her flight ticket. And that saved a lot of money, a lot of efforts before you travel to a popular tourist destination, especially during peak season. I think we have to make more options to get well prepared for the travel rush.
So I think for a place as popular as Hainan, both visitors and the government need to do more thorough planning for the trip.
Yeah, I think we should make a sound plan ahead of the holiday. It's very important. And some experts also advise the local government to tell the travelers who have plans to travel to Hainan that how many cars have already booked the ferry tickets, and then tell them to consider other travel options because we have a lot of bookings here.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Yunqi.
To address the challenges of leaving the island, local authorities have taken measures to temporarily expand transport capacity across various channels.
针对新能源车的购票的这个问题呢，我们这边也一直在关注。
Deputy Manager Liang Chao with the port in Haikou
我们在目前每天3个专班
says that in addition to the existing 3 ferry services exclusively for electric cars, they have added more shifts to carry more electric cars. These efforts have led to a substantial reduction in the number of cars and queuing time at ports. However, with Hainan expected to become a free trade port by the end of next year, there is undoubtedly a pressing need for a more consistent transport system to prepare for an anticipated increase of visitors in the near future. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Deep Dive. If you enjoyed what you just heard, don't forget to follow us on your podcast platform. Just search for Deep Dive. You can also leave comments to let us know what you want to learn about China and beyond. This episode is brought to you by me, Li Yunqi, and my colleagues Zhang Zhang and Qi Zhi. Special thanks to CGTN Radio reporter Guo Yan. I'll see you in the next one.